So in this video, we went out of town for Father's Day to my in-laws' place. So I have the lake in the background because that's where I wanted to film it. So we're talking about chapter 5. We're moving into exam number 2. Material is chapter 5. We've got the integumentary system, and let's talk about the breakdown of those, the two areas within that system. So how we break down the integumentary system is that it's going to be broken down into the cutaneous membrane and all of the accessory structures. So the cutaneous membrane is epidermis, dermis underneath that, that is cutaneous membrane. And then the accessory structures, your hair, your sebaceous glands releasing the oil, your nerve sensors that can sense hot and cold and pressure. All of those things are going to be part of the accessory structures associated with the integumentary system. The skin is going to be, again, its own. We're starting our own systems. It's its own body system. So we're going to learn all the different systems. And this is one of our first ones that we get to learn in anatomy and physiology is going to be the integumentary system. And it is going to be a significant portion of your body weight, which I never really thought about until I read that factoid in the textbook years and years ago, that it is 16% of your body weight is just your skin and hair, nails. And so it is the outside of us. It is constantly being eroded away. When we had to learn about tissues before, we talked about stratified squamous. So we're going to go into all the different layers in here in the next section in the intro to the skin. Why is it not changing slides for me when I want it to? Let's see if I can get it to fix that. Okay. There we go. So again, it is an organ system, and 16% of the body weight. And we can see these two major areas, the cutaneous membrane, epidermis, dermis, accessory structures, hair, skin, nails. All right, moving on. Layers of the skin. We are going to talk about all of that in the next section, but this is a lovely slide where we can see all of the different parts. We've got epidermis here. We got the dermis below the epidermis. And then below that is the hypodermis, and that's going to be the superficial fascia underneath the skin, in between the other layers of stuff. It's going to be where the fat cells, we can see all of this adipose down here, all of this fat cells, all this stuff is going to be found in the hypodermis. So below the epidermis, below the dermis, hypodermis is where we're going to find a lot of that area where the adipose cells tend to accumulate. But here, epidermis, dermis, and then below that, hypodermis. And then we've got all of the accessory items that we mentioned, and we're going to go through a whole section of accessory stuff. But we've got the hair follicle, because we've got hair all over our bodies because we are mammals. We have the sebaceous gland that helps keep your hair nice and healthy and shiny, and also makes your face super oily and keeps your skin moisturized, is the sebaceous gland. And then we've got the receptor at the bottom of the hair follicle, so it can sense what's going on. If somebody tugs on your hair, you can feel it. We have the erector pili muscle, and that's going to help raise the hair when you get cold, right? One of the things that your body does is to raise your hair. You get goosebumps. And that erector pili muscle is in charge of that. And so the goosebumps raise your hair. You collect more air pockets in between the hairs, and that allows you to have a little more insulation than if the hair was laying flat. So the more air that gets trapped in there, your body can heat, acts as insulation for you. So when you get cold, you get goosebumps. The erector pili muscle gives you the goosebumps. What am I leaving out? Nerves, of course, the Pacinian corpuscle. And there's going to be Merkel cells, Pacinians. We'll talk about those guys. And cannot leave off the sweat glands, the eccrine glands. Here we go at the bottom of them, associated with this. And once we get past epidermis, we said epithelial tissues do not have blood flow through them, but the connective tissues underneath do. So you're going to have all sorts of vascular areas throughout the skin system, except for in the epithelial tissues. So layers of the skin. We're going to start off with the epidermis. That's going to be the outermost layer. Epi's on the outside. And so with the epidermis, it's going to be all of this up here, this guy, that area up there. It's going to come in lots of different layers. They are filled with cells called keratinocytes. Keratin. If you think of keratin, that's found in your hair and your nails. That's going to be those keratinocytes. That's going to be your epithelial cells. They are stratified squamous shaped cells in there. The keratin is going to allow us to be water resistant. When we go swimming in the lake or wherever, and you're sitting in your bathtub, your epithelial cells out there, your stratified squamous, these keratinocytes, they release that keratin inside of them. And that's what helps them become waterproof. So not every cell is going to have keratin in it. When we talked about the stratified squamous in your tongue, you didn't want to waterproof your tongue, but you do want to do that for your outside of your body so the water cannot just get in totally easily. So those are keratinocytes. It is going to make these cells water resistant and harder in this area. So again, composed of keratinocytes. And let's talk about the thin and the thick. There are 5 layers in the epidermis. They are called strata, the different stratums. The stratum, we're going to have 4 of them normally, but in places like our palms of our hand, our soles of our feet, where we have really, really thick skin, things that are undergoing abrasion a lot, we have all 5 layers. So you're going to see all 5 of the layers, 5 strata on the thick areas of the skin. So if we compare these, I heard an analogy was comparing like a Ziploc bag in thickness for our thin skin, and then the thicker skin would be closer to like a paper towel kind of thickness on the thick parts, palms of the hand, soles of the feet, and they have 5 layers on them. Let's go through the stratums. So we start at the bottom. You can start at the top or you can start at the bottom. I like to start at the bottom because it kind of flows with the textbook, but it's either way. An analogy to remember these stratums, we already went through this in the lab practical, so you've already seen these, but we'll go through them again in lecture because they will be on the lecture test. To remember them in order, because you might need to know them in order, there might be a question that asks you something like that. From the outside, a phrase that can help you remember it from the outside in: come, let's get sunburned. Come, let's get sunburned. If you are outside and prone to sunburn, maybe this will help you remember the different stratums in order. I'm going to go it in reverse order. Instead of come, let's get sunburned, I'm going to go boys say girls like chocolate. And of course, this is just a phrase. I personally do like chocolate though, so it helps me remember. So boys say girls like chocolate. We're gonna start with the B and boys or burned. And this is stratum basal, the basement, also a B word, basement layer. This is gonna have the basal cells, the stem cells for all of the epidermis is coming in this layer right here in the stratum basal. So it's our basement layer, it's right here. Here it is. And so what all is in this basement layer? It's going to sit over top of the dermis, and we'll talk about the dermal papillae when we go into the next area. It's going to be attached by hemidesmosomes. Remember we talked about desmosomes were like this Velcro attachment points from cell to cell. And then the hemidesmosomes were half of the Velcro, and they were on the bottom attaching to the basement layer down there. So they're going to have hemidesmosomes. They are filled with the stem cells that are going to produce those keratinocytes. What other cells do we find in here? We're going to find these guys. We're going to find Merkel cells. And those guys are going to help us with touch. So Merkel cells are right at the border of epidermis and dermis. That's this guy right over here is the Merkel cells. So we have a few of these. They're going to help sense touch, and they're going to be mechanical receptors. So when they are pressurized, when they sense the pressure, they're going to release the chemicals that set off the nerve endings that tell your body that we're undergoing pressure in this area of our body. So those are Merkel cells. We're going to find those in the basement layer, the stratum basal, Merkel cells. Another cell that we're going to find are going to be melanocytes. So we had talked about melanocytes last week. When I can't remember which student it was, but somebody had brought up asking about melanocytes, and we're going to go through them in just a couple more slides. We'll go through them, but melanocytes produce melanin. That's the coloration in your skin, whether you are darker skinned or fair skin or somewhere in between. Melanocytes are what give your skin your pigment, and so they are going to produce a substance called melanin, and it can vary in coloration, but it's going to be a yellow, slightly darker brown substance, this pigment that gets produced, and it's going to be packaged into vesicles, and those vesicles are going to move from cell to cell. So we're going to pass that stuff that gets produced by the melanocytes right there, and they're going to package up the melanin, and it's going to move throughout the epidermis, and we'll talk about the different stratums. It's going to go through the different stratums, and lysosomes will come along and eventually eat up those vesicles with pigments inside, and then it'll go away. But melanocytes produce melanin, and that's going to give your skin some coloration. So we'll talk about all the different ways that your skin has coloration: blood flow, melanocytes, keratin. So we'll get to those. But I do want you to know stratum basal is the basement layer of the epidermis. It's sitting right on top of the dermis. It's filled with stem cells that are going to produce the major cell found in this area, the keratinocytes. Other cell types that you can find in this basement layer: Merkel cells for stimulation on pressure. They are right in that basement membrane. And the melanocytes that are going to give your skin your pigment are also found in this basement layer. This is stratum basal. It is the bottom innermost layer of the epidermis. So we're going to go up another layer. So we'll go up to the next layer, and this one is the spinosum. So it is said that when you look at this layer under a microscope, it looks spiny. The cells, the melanocytes, look kind of spiky looking. So that's how they get this name, spiny layer. These are going to have 8 to 10 layers of the keratinocytes, and they're going to have desmosomes, those velcro pieces that we're talking about that keep the cells together and attached, because this is going to be a pretty close packing of the epithelial. So again, the water can't sneak through. We are going to have another cell type. So in this cell type, found in this layer are going to be melanocytes, Langerhans cells. Got melanocytes on the brain. I really want to talk to you all about skin pigmentation. Dendritic cells are a type of dendritic cell is the Langerhans cell. And these are going to be some white blood cells, dendritic cells. They are going to help fight off bad guys that you may find in the skin, in the epidermis. So they're going to help defend against microorganisms. And if we're going to talk about skin cancer a little bit later on, but if skin cells start to undergo uncontrolled cell growth, then hopefully our Langerhans cells are going to sense that something's wrong with those cells and eat them up too. So they can help with some superficial skin cancers. Langerhans cells, white blood cells, helping out in the immune system, and that is going to be found in the second layer, the spiny layer. The spinosum is going to be the second layer up when we're coming up through the epidermis. The next layer, granulosum. So instead of 8 to 10 like the spinosum was, it was a pretty big chunk. Spinosum is this one. If you see it on the lab model, it has a really good chunk of pink tissue on the lab picture. Off of that model there is the spinosum layer. Let's go up to the granulosum. And in the granulosum, remember I always said that connective tissue is going to have the blood flow and the epithelial tissue is not going to have the blood flow. Well, we have the blood flow bringing the nutrients to our bottommost basement layer, right? They're going to get all the good stuff. So that's where our stem cells are. They're going to produce the keratinocytes. And then after a while, we're going to go up and up and up and up. And as we move further and further away from that blood flow, from the nutrients, we are going to slow down on our growth, and eventually the cells are going to not grow anymore, and they're just going to die off. So in the granulosum, we have stopped dividing, and we are producing that keratin that I was telling y'all is going to make us water resistant. they stop dividing, the cells are getting smushier. It's a very technical term, smushier. They are going to get thinner and flatter. So they are going to definitely take on that squamosal shape, stratified squamosal shape in this layer. Did I tell you how simple squamosal? Now I'm backtracking and wondering if I told you how simple squamosal. This is definitely stratified, stratified, stratified. So if I misspoke early in the video, I can't remember if I did, but this is absolutely stratified. It is not simple. It is stratified squamosal cells. So these guys, they were thicker and a little bit chunkier before when they were fresh and new. And then as they move up and away from the blood flow, away from the nutrients and all the good stuff, that they start to age and they get thinner, they don't divide anymore, they start to smush down. So they get thinner and flatter and they become less permeable. And again, that keratin is being produced in there. And so it gives it this kind of grainy appearance. The stratum granulosum is the grainy layer. Then if you are on the palms of the hand, the soles of the feet, you are going to have the stratum lucidum. So in the thick skin, we have this layer, stratum lucidum, and lucidum means clear, the clear layer. And so these are clear because it has a substance in there, elidin, and it's a protein, and it kind of gives it that clear appearance. It helps with our water barrier. These guys are, they're, as we go up, again, we were saying they were getting thinner and thinner, and they're going to start to stack up on each other, and they just look like pancakes in there. So in our clear layer, these guys are flattened. They're really thickly, densely packed. They're filled with the keratin and the elidin protein that helps them look thick. And you're only going to find, look clear. You're only going to find them, I got thick, I think I've said thick like 5 times. You're only going to find them on, again, the thick layers that are about the size of the dimensions of paper towels thickness on the palms of the hand, sole of the feet. That's where you see the lucidum layer. You're not going to see a lucidum layer on places that are, thin-skinned area. You're not going to have the lucidum area. You only have that stratum on thick skin. So that's kind of the exceptional layer. It's here on our model, on our plastic models that you'll see pictures of in the lab manual. Oftentimes it does look clear, like it's supposed to. Moving up to the outermost layer, it is going to be the stratum corneum. This is super thick, 15 to 30 layers thick, stratum corneum. The horny layer, the corny layer is how I remember it, because it is the corneum. And this is going to, it takes to get to the bottom, to the basal, where we have created the stem cells and we're creating all these new baby cells, it's going to take about 7 to 10 days to get all the way up here to the stratum corneum, our thickest layer. By then, those cells are dead, dead, dead. They are so far away from the dermis, and they are losing all that blood flow and all those nutrients. So as they went up right through all the different stratums, they smushed down and they just died off. They stopped growing. They are smushed. They are really thick by the time you get to the stratum corneum. It takes 7 to 10 days to get up there, and then it hangs out for a couple weeks. In a month, you have completely replaced all your epidermis tissue up here on average. It takes about 4 weeks to replace your dermal tissue. As you are aging, this takes longer. When you're younger, you may replace your epidermis, your epidermis even faster than that, but it's roughly about 4 weeks to switch out the cells on the outside layer on their epidermis. These guys are water resistant, like we've been saying this whole time, and we are obviously going to lose her when we sweat. So we have perspiration and sensible perspiration, perspiration that we're not noticing, and then the sensible perspiration that we do. But this outer layer, the stratum corneum, is here for about a month. So I think I have a question asking you about if you had a tattoo, if you have ink on your body, that needs to be pushed through the epidermis and down into the dermis, so that I don't have any ink on my person. I'm not a tattoo fan for me personally, but if you have ink on your body, that needle has to go all the way down into the dermis and place the ink there. Because if you put an epidermis, then you have nothing left for all of your money a month later. It'll all be gone. So definitely know the stratums of the epidermis. I know they were on the lab practical. They are definitely going to be in the lecture test too. So descriptors, their nicknames, if that helps, if you can remember their order, who's in what order, that's always helpful too. I can't remember if I have them as multiple choice or matching, but I will tell you on the review as far as the stratums, but we'll need to know them. Know the stratums, they're always on the lab practicals and the lecture tests. If you have questions, again, email me. All right, so another great view of the epidermis, and we can see here is our basal layer. Here's the spinosum, granulosum, and then this isn't thick layer, so we're missing the lucidum, and then we've got the corneum up there. And then below the epidermis is the dermis. So it's gonna have the blood flow going to it. It's also going to have more sensory receptors in the dermis too, some nerve sensors in there. Here is, you see how it kind of goes down and it goes up. And here's another dermal papilla. Anytime you hear the word papilla in AP1 and AP2, a papilla is just a projection that it's a bump, it's a papilla, it's a papillae. It's a just a raised surface. You're going to need to know papilla on the tongue. There's dermal papilla. Here are more dermal papilla, and this area is called the papillary layer because of these dermal papilla. So we've got the papillary layer down here where you can see all these ridges, and then underneath that layer is called the reticular layer. The papillary layer is going to have the areolar tissue, and we learned that in the histology chapter that it had the 3 different fibers in there. There was elastin fibers, there was collagen fibers, there was going to be reticular fibers, and they had fibrosite that is in charge of that tissue type. That was the areolar tissue. Areolar tissue, because I think a few students were putting areola, and that is a different body part. Areolar with an R, areolar tissue is going to be found in the papillary layer. And then underneath those bumps, underneath those papillae, are going to be the reticular layer. And both of these layers are parts of the dermis. So the dermis papillary layer, reticular layer. The reticular layer is going to have the dense, irregular connective tissue. So I was telling y'all that you can see the collagen fibers in dense irregular because they're going kind of all over the place. When we were talking about dense regular, they were all in one line, right? They were all these pretty parallel collagen fibers that were really strong in one direction, like in our ligaments, in our tendons. And in dense irregular, the collagen fibers kind of went all over the place, and that's because you can pull your skin all over the place and it should still be okay if you pulled it in different directions. So you're going to have in the reticular layer dense irregular connective tissue. You're going to have collagen, you're going to have elastin, so it is both strong and stretchy. And you're going to have in this area the blood vessels, the lymphatic vessels, nerves, and accessory organs, those hair follicles and sweat glands, are going to be in the dermis too. So we're going to see them in the dermis, and they're going to come up through the dermis into the epidermis. Here is a great picture of dermal papillae. That's what gives us our fingerprints, are the dermis projecting up on the dermal papillae, causing those fingerprints that we have in those areas in the thick skin on the palms of our feet and the soles of our hands. We can really make out the dermal papillae. All right, so what's underneath the dermis? And that is going to be hypo, because hypo means below, hypodermis, and that's going to separate the skin, again, from anything else underneath the skin. So there are skeletal muscles that's found underneath the skin. Hypodermis is in between that and the dermis. It is going to have lots of, it keeps beeping for all the emails. It's going to have lots of adipose tissue depending on where it's at. Different locations in your body are going to be different storage areas. So hips, uh, thighs, belly are going to have more areas to store the fat than, say, the back of your hand. That's not really where you're going to have a whole lot of adipose. But the hypodermis will store the adipose. It just depends on what part of your body is going to store more adipose than other parts. And adipose, we said, is our long-term energy storage. It's going to give us energy, it's going to give us insulation from the environment, and it's going to also add as cushioning for your body. So you're going to start to accumulate as we age, as we all put on a little bit of weight as we get older. Some of us put on this as we start to hit puberty. You start to put the adipose tissue on, and we are going to find the adipose in the hypodermis. And so it is over here on our model and our picture from OpenStax textbook. All right, so the skin coloration that I was all excited about to talk to us about. What were the name of the cells that produce the pigmentation? And those were called the melanocytes, right? And we found them in the stratum basal, in the basement membrane of the epidermis. And so we're going to see these melanocytes, and they are going to produce melanin, and it is going to be a brownish, yellowish, black pigment that can be produced. It comes from some different amino acids put together, and we're going to produce this pigment, this melanin, and it is going to be packaged up in a vesicle. So it's going to undergo exocytosis, and it is going to leave the melanocyte and this vesicle, and then they're going to go into all of the different keratinocytes, the keratinocytes, however you want to pronounce these things. As long as we can spell them, we're all good. So if you want to call them keratinocytes, if you want to call them keratinocytes, the cells that are going to be part of the epidermis, the majority of the epidermal cells. So we have melanocytes that produce melanin, packages it up into vesicles, and exocytoses it out into the melanocytes, the keratinocytes. And so we package this up and we stuck it into the other cells, and then it's going to move from the other cells to layer to layer. And so they are going to go through the different stratums. And as it goes up the stratums, eventually it's going to run into lysosomes, and the lysosomes, we said its job is to digest and break stuff down, and lysosomes will break it down. So if somebody is a pale-skinned individual, then it doesn't go as high in the stratums. So it may get taken out in the spinosal layer before it even gets to the granular layer. If you are a darker skinned individual, those melanosomes, the little vesicles of melanin, may be bigger. They may have more pigment in them, and then they may travel further through the stratums and get closer and closer to that corneum layer. So they may get all the way up to the granulosome layer. If you're a darker skinned individual, and you will have, you can see, we got lots of packets up here in this granular layer on a darker skinned individual, where we're not going to see that on our lighter skinned individual. They have them, but they do not have as much melanin inside of them. And typically there's less of them because they don't even make it up to the granulosa layer. They can get taken out in the spinosal layer below that. So that's the difference. Everybody's got melanocytes. Everybody has these. And they are producing the melanin, that pigment that can run anywhere from a yellowish tone to a black tone. And it will be packaged up into vesicles and exocytosis into all the different cells in the epidermis. And then how long does it get to stay in those cells before the lysosomes come along and take them out? Darker skinned individuals produce melanin. They're going to be slightly bigger packets, and they're more abundant in the skin than the lighter skinned individuals that are not going to have them as abundant in the skin because the lysosomes came and took them away. So differences in skin coloration. I am always going to ask you this question because I think it's a good question on what gives your skin its coloration. So it's not just melanin. It's not. Melanin is what we talk about here on this slide a lot because we talk about the melanocytes, but it can also be other things. What happens when you get hot? The blood flow goes to the surface of your skin. And what happens if you get, I don't know, embarrassed? You blush, right? The blood flow goes to the surface of your skin, and that can change your skin coloration. So hemoglobin in your blood can change your skin coloration. And there's this substance called keratin, and it has the word carrot in the name, so you can guess what coloration that pigment is. Keratin is an orange. It reflects orange light. It is an orange pigment that you can pick up in your diet. And so I always share with everybody, and some of my students that have had me before, I've heard this story that your body will pick up what you eat. And so I was a first time mom. I've got 3 kids now. But we had picked up this packet of food. It was like a big case of baby food, and I was making my own food at home. And we had picked up this case of baby food at BJ's, and I thought I was doing so good because my kid was eating it, like all of it. And I'm like, yes, I'm the best mom ever. He loves this stuff. He's doing so good, and I didn't think anything of it. So he was eating all this food like a champ, and I brought him to the pediatrician, and he kind of gave me a concerned look, and then started looking at my child and checking his eyes and stuff. And he was like, what you feeding him? And I'm like, oh, he's doing so good. He's eating sweet potato pack that I got from BJ's, and sweet potato and carrots, and sweet potatoes and rice, and sweet potatoes and ham, and sweet potatoes. And he's like, oh, so sweet potatoes, yeah? Yeah, so sweet potatoes have keratin in it. And that was accumulating in my baby's skin. And I did not notice that my baby was turning orange. Yeah, I turned my baby orange because of the keratin in the food in his diet. Did he stay orange? No, no, he totally didn't. But he accumulated it because I was feeding him so much sweet potato, which he was gobbling up and loved at the time. He hates it now, by the way, hates sweet potatoes. But at the time, he loved them. Keratin is an orange pigment, and if you eat a whole bunch of it, it will show up in your skin, and it looks like you are jaundiced. In my defense, also, my oldest has red hair and very fair skin, and I didn't notice. I feel bad. It was a parent fail moment that I'm sharing with you. So there are different things that can change your skin coloration. Hemoglobin, your blood flow. And that is the same if I was telling you you're flushed because you're hot, or if you start to undergo cyanosis because you're cold and the blood is getting pulled away from the tissues, and what's left behind is deoxygenated and it looks blue. You look blue. If anybody's seen somebody who's really cold, your lips, your skin start to turn blue. So that can affect your coloration. Keratin, in my embarrassing story, can affect your coloration, as well as melanin. So all of these things can affect the coloration of your skin. So it's not just melanocytes. That circulation I was telling you about is going to be that protein hemoglobin, and it was that quaternary protein structure that we had to learn. And in the hemoglobin structure, there's this unit called heme, and the heme has an iron in the center, and that's what binds the oxygen. So you have to make sure that you're getting all the iron in your diet so you know that you will be able to manufacture hemoglobin efficiently and effectively. So we can see in this picture here, we've got bright red oxygenated blood on this side, and then we have darker deoxygenated blood. That oxygen has been pulled off because we need oxygen for aerobic respiration. All of our cells are undergoing cellular respiration, and so they'll pull the oxygen off and it'll become darker. So deoxygenated blood is darker, the bright red blood is the oxygenated blood, and so that can affect the coloration of your skin. Less blood flow is going to initially be a pale color. I don't know if y'all have seen pictures of Raynaud's syndrome. I have a friend that has Raynaud's syndrome. And so when she gets cold, the blood flow isn't as good in her hands, and they will look white. They will look very pale. And if it keeps going, then you are going to decrease the available oxygen to your tissues, and you will undergo cyanosis. You'll undergo cyanosis. So if somebody is very, very cold, they've been exposed to extreme temperatures of cold, the blood is pulled away from the surface of the skin, and you are losing blood flow to that tissue. Eventually, it's going to turn blue, and after a while, without oxygen going to those tissues will die, and you will have tissues lost due to frostbite from that. So dermal circulation definitely has and importance, bringing the oxygen, bringing the nutrients to all of these cells. All right, so that finishes this first video on layers of the skin. And we'll go into all the accessory ones in the next video.